What's going on, guys? Today we're going to continue theorizing how Attack on Titan would have changed if Levi had chosen Erwin to inherit the Colossal Titan. This video is my favourite what if scenario I've done so far, as it explores an alternate version of the attack on Marley, which includes Eren, Zeke and obviously Erwin himself doing crazy things that majorly deviate from the main timeline. For those of you that haven't seen part 1 of What If Eren Got the Colossal, that video ended with Erwin and Kiyomi coming to an agreement that would see both sides and potentially the Middle Eastern alliance all working together to put an end to Marley's warriors. If you want to know how or why an alliance with the Middle East might have been possible, then I strongly recommend checking out part 1, but today in part 2 we're going to begin things with a 2-year time skip from the last video. Before we get into it, however, I'm giving away a special edition Beast Titan Funko and a regular size Levi to go with it, and all you have to do to be in with a chance of winning is simply sub to the channel and leave a comment below. As long as you are subscribed, your comment will have a chance of being randomly selected as the winner, just like Jordan, who won the first giveaway we did in part 1. Okay, so the best place to start this video off is in Marley, where the situation would be getting incredibly tense. Thanks to a completely anonymous source, the military higher-ups would have received credible evidence that spies from Paradis have infiltrated the country and are about to launch a revenge attack on Marlyean soil. Although the identity of these eldian spies are unknown, it's entirely possible they have the power of multiple Titan shifters among them, including the founder or maybe even the Colossal. So if they were to strike, it could be the biggest disaster Marley's had in like the last 100 years. This is why the warrior unit and Commander Magath have been back home on the continent for nearly a month, having been temporarily recalled from their war against the Mid-East Alliance. A decision to take them away from the war and recall them back to Marley wouldn't be as controversial as you might expect, considering most of the Mid-East war was fought on the sea with no place for Titans to intervene anyway, but still, it would give the Middle Eastern forces a temporary advantage. In the few weeks since Reiner and the gang have been back on the mainland, Paradis surprisingly haven't launched any attacks, and crucially, no movement from eldian spies has been detected by Marlyean intelligence. This inactivity would cause the general to rethink his strategy, and at Warrior HQ, he'd ordered the Beast and Jaw Titan to be redeployed to the Middle East in a few days, while Reiner and Pieck will be staying behind in Marley as a precaution. Sometime after the meeting is done, Zeke would innocently invite his fellow warriors and their families for dinner the following evening, so they can all have a meal together prior to him and Porco going back to the war. Of course, the others would agree to come since they have no reason to say no, and once they finish talking, Zeke would stroll into his office as the others head towards the internment zone. In his office, the captain would lock the door as he quickly writes down certain times and locations on a piece of paper and then places it inside his pocket alongside something else. He'd then make his way out of HQ as discreetly as humanly possible, making sure not to draw any attention as he walks in the direction of a nearby alleyway. In this alleyway would be a mystery man who'd been waiting for the last few hours, and after seeing Zeke, he'd start asking questions about the internment zone and a few other things, to which the Beast Titan would simply pass on the letter he wrote. Zeke would also take 2 vials out of his pocket that each contain a transparent liquid, before handing them over to the man and then immediately making his way back to the gate of Liberio. Flashing forward around 24 hours, Magath would be in the middle of giving a briefing in preparation for the Beast and Jaw Titan going away. He'd explain that more troops will be brought down from the mountains to patrol the streets of Marley, while random blood tests will continue to be carried out to discover any eldian spies hiding in the general population. As the meeting goes on, Reiner would start doubting whether he has what it takes to protect his homeland in Zeke and Porco's absence, especially given that he still suffers from nightmares and PTSD to this day. That being said, towards the end of the briefing, he'd get some slight reassurance from Magath, who'd claim that a weapon arrived at HQ last night that's capable of taking down a Titan. At this time, the commander wouldn't be allowed to go into further details about what this weapon is, but he'd mention it to reassure Pieck and Reiner that they'll have backup in case things take a bad turn. Zeke would naturally be the one to press Magath on the details of what this new weapon is, but the commander wouldn't give anything away, as only the very highest ranked officers would be aware of its presence in the city. Later that evening, everyone would arrive at the warrior captain's house for dinner, with Reiner bringing his mother, Pieck bringing her dad, and Porco bringing both of his parents. Interestingly, Zeke's own grandparents would be absent from the meal, but he'd probably claim that they were feeling unwell, which I guess is a believable excuse considering their age and mental state. Hours later, all the guests would be having a good time, with the food and wine being almost completely finished, but throughout the night, the Beast would make sure never to lose track of the time. Around 10 o'clock, he'd politely ask his guests to leave, and as the Galliard and Braun families make their way home, Zeke would pull Pieck to the side for a quick chat. Moving over to Reiner's house, he and Karina would arrive home within 10 minutes or so, and the vice captain would head upstairs to his childhood bedroom. Entering the room, he'd instantly notice a breeze coming through the open window, and as he closes it, someone would suddenly shut the door behind him. Reiner would turn around to see none other than Eren frickin' Yeager in the corner of his room, fully kitted out in the upgraded ODM gear, and I imagine his shock would be even worse than it was in the main series. It's not that he'd be surprised that Eren is in Marley, because the evidence already implied that might have been the case, but instead, Reiner's fear would come from the fact that he's being confronted in the one place he's most vulnerable. With his mother being downstairs, the Armoured Titan can't even think about transforming without risking killing her in the process, but by contrast, Eren has nothing to lose, and could be ready to blow up the whole neighbourhood at any given time. Switching back to Zeke and Pieck, these two would be walking along the streets of the internment zone, having dropped her father back home. Zeke's ultimate goal at this point would be to lure her into this building, and I'm sure he'd tell her any lie to make that happen. You guys maybe let me know in the comments what you think he would say to try and convince her to follow him, but regardless of what he says, I think she'd still be suspicious at the fact that, he only wants to bring her and not Reiner and Porco as well. On top of that, Zeke knows firsthand that Pieck is a smart girl who could realize if she's being taken to a trap, which is why I think he'd have a backup plan already in place. The wine that Pieck's dad was drinking from all evening contains the warrior captain's spinal fluid, so if Pieck tries to resist him in any way, he can always rely on that backup and threaten to turn her dad into a pure Titan. Anyway, once they make it to this building, Zeke would be the one to personally cut the rope, trapping Pieck in this underground container that was specifically designed to restrain Titan shifters. Seconds later, a handful of scouts would enter the room, including Niall and Hanji, and their priority is securing the cart Titan in case any Marlyean soldiers enter the internment zone. Dozens more scouts would be on the surrounding rooftops ready to provide support, while Commander Erwin would also be outside for a very different reason. As Zeke exits the building, Erwin would maneuver down from the rooftops and onto the street, coming face to face with the man who essentially killed him 4 years earlier. At the Braun household, Eren would have forced Reiner to take a seat by now, as the two of them have a massively awkward conversation. Eren would start aggressively asking loaded questions about why his mother had to die, and if Karina's life is somehow more valuable than Carla's. Meanwhile, Reiner would just be sitting there trying not to say anything to piss him off. It should be mentioned that this version of Eren has had different experiences to the one in the main show, with a big deviation being that he never went rogue in Marley. It was that experience living on the continent that changed his perspective in the final season, as he realized that Eldians in Liberio were just people, no different to the people on Paradis. In this new timeline, however, Eren never had that realization, and as a result, his demeanor would be angrier because he'd be more motivated by the vengeful spark inside him that wants to make Reiner suffer as much as possible. From downstairs, Karina would hear some of the noise and call out to her son to ask if he's okay, but Eren would signal for him not to reply. This would cause Reiner to break down under the guilt, because he'd understand that it was his decision to carry on with the mission that day that has indirectly led to his friends being dead and now his hometown being in danger. He'd likely collapse to the ground and beg Eren to kill him as long as Liberio was left unharmed, while simultaneously as this is going on, Karina would start making her way up the stairs. Across the street, Floch, Mikasa and the rest of Levi's squad would be observing the situation from the rooftops, waiting for Eren to come back outside. The original plan was for him to hide inside the property, catch Reiner by surprise and then chop off his limbs, and Eren was sent in by himself because as a Titan shifter he's the only one who could survive if the Armoured Titan decided to transform. While that possibility was always unlikely with his mother being in the house, Erwin still wouldn't want to take any chances with this because the scouts have been burned by Reiner one too many times in the past. As the squad try and get a look through Reiner's bedroom window, they notice Karina opening the bedroom door, and with barely any time to process that information, the house would explode in front of their eyes, with the attack Titan emerging from the flames. An incomplete Armoured Titan would be lying face down in the rubble, and Levi would think to himself that he should have known Eren might do something like this. On the ground, the Armoured would be lacking in energy due to his less than enthusiastic will to live, but he desperately tried to pick himself up to search for Karina. Before that can happen though, the attack Titan would just start absolutely beating the shit out of him as the innocent civilians start running out of their homes and away from the battle. I imagine during this one-sided fight, Eren would do something totally unnecessary like maybe throwing Reiner into an apartment building or doing something like that, cause to him, this beatdown is payback for everything the warriors did to Paradis. Mikasa and Jean would likely be apprehensive about the excessive loss of innocent life that Eren is causing, as Captain Levi would be checking his stopwatch to make sure they have time for this. Now, in case any of you are wondering about Porco, he'd probably just be at home relaxing, totally unaware of what his comrades are going through. Unlike what happened to Reiner, there wouldn't have been any scouts waiting for him inside his own house, but there would be around 20 soldiers monitoring him from the rooftops. I think he'd first start to realize something's wrong when waves of civilians start running past his house, and when Galliard eventually goes to check outside, he'd see an apartment building collapse once Reiner gets thrown into it. After seeing that, he'd 100% get triggered like he always does, and run in the direction of the action. The 20 scouts on the roof would start trailing behind him as he gets closer and closer to Eren, and they start firing at Porco once he makes it into some open space away from the civilians. In his human form, Galliard would manage to dodge a few of these bullets, but at some point he would get shot in a non-fatal area. At the same time, Eren would continue beating the stuffing out of the armoured Titan, and in desperation, Reiner would scream so loudly that it could be heard from outside the internment zone. 4 years earlier in Shiganshina, he used a similar tactic to get the attention of his fellow warriors, but this time around, I think he'd also be hoping to get the attention of Commander Magath and his alleged Titan-killing weapon. The armoured by himself simply doesn't have enough strength to fight Eren and the whole of Levi squad by himself, so without backup, he will die without knowing whether his mother is alive under the rubble. A moment after his scream, the Jaw Titan would appear in his neighbourhood at high speed, having used his injury from being shot as the catalyst for his transformation. In this Titan form, he'd managed to quickly kill a couple of the scouts that were trailing him, but the remaining 18 of them would still be just behind. The members of Levi's squad would obviously see Porco trying to charge at Eren, and Mikasa would be the one to fire off her Thunder Spear to send him flying backwards. Meanwhile, after getting some instructions from Levi, Eren would stop messing around with Reiner, and he'd back away as Jean, Connie and Sasha launch a coordinated Thunder Spear attack. This attack would completely blow Reiner out of his shell, while at the same time the Jaw Titan would continue to be ripped apart by the dozens of scouts surrounding him. Rewinding the clock a bit, outside the internment zone, Commander Magath would have been woken up by the sounds of hundreds of panicking eldians. At HQ, he'd attempt to call the homes of each warrior with no response, while the general would start organizing troops to surround Liberio. From their office, they each would have heard the armoured Titan scream, which I mentioned earlier, and this would confirm to Magath that one of his shifters has to be in serious trouble. We've seen in the anime how he doesn't like the warriors being put in risky situations where they could lose their power, so even though he doesn't know what's happened to Reiner, he'd realize that he needs to send in some support just in case. Not that long afterwards, hundreds of Marlyean troops would be making their way to the walls under the general's orders, but these preparations would be interrupted by a strange object flying out of the internment zone. A single wooden barrel would race over their heads as it flies further into the city, and as it begins to come down, a quick flash of lightning would appear, followed by a powerful explosion. The blast itself would instantly flatten a lot of Marlyean infrastructure, including the train station, buildings, roads, parts of the wall, and like 90% of Warrior HQ. Towards the center of the internment zone, even the scouts would be feeling some intense blowback, but Erwin intentionally wouldn't have done a maximum blast so he could minimize that risk. Thanks to information they acquired from Zeke, the main purpose of this transformation would be to wipe out the high-ranking Marlyean officers at HQ, thereby destabilizing the chain of command. As we know, most other high-ranking officers would be in the Middle East right now dealing with that war, so the blow from Erwin means that the troops in Liberio no longer have any leaders to coordinate them. That by itself gives Paradis and Hizuru a perfect window to launch the next stage of their invasion, but first they need to take the remaining shifters out of Marlyean hands. Switching back into the internment zone, Eren would pick up the Jaw Titan's decimated body and prepare to bite the nape, but he'd pause when the Beast Titan appears from around the corner. As Zeke walks in their direction, Galliard would be the most excited person to see him, but he'd realize pretty quickly that something was wrong. Contrary to what Porco would expect, the Beast Titan wouldn't try to save him or even attack the Survey Corps. In fact, I imagine he'd just be casually strolling through the street. Eventually, Zeke would crouch down to examine Reiner's tied up, unconscious body, and as he picks it up, nearly all the scouts would make their way onto the rooftops to watch. The only remaining soldier on ground level would be Floch, and everyone else would be observing from above as he walks closer to the Beast Titan. Zeke would likely ask him if he's sure about what's about to happen, and the scout would have to give him some kind of signal to let him know that he's okay. Without hesitation, the Beast Titan would then scream at the top of his lungs, causing a flashing light to appear where Floch was standing, not to mention a few other lights would simultaneously appear across the zone. As a side note, the whole time this is going on, Eren would still be holding the Jaw Titan in his hands, basically forcing Galliard to watch this top 10 anime betrayal. When the smoke finally disappears, Floch's Pure Titan would be revealed, and thanks to the way it was created, Zeke's royal blood gives him full control over its actions. The first thing the beast would do would be to order Floch to eat the armored Titan, because like I said, Reiner's unconscious body would be in the palm of Zeke's hand. The Floch Pure Titan would instantly run towards it as Galliard watches in disbelief, but as is usually the case with Reiner, I figured he'd get some kind of plot armor that would save him just in time. As the Floch Titan is about to, reach him and eat him alive, it would get absolutely skewered by a pillar of hardening that randomly spirals out the ground. Behind Zeke, we'd see a fully formed Lara Tiber Warhammer Titan approaching, and in case you didn't guess, the Warhammer would be the Titan-killing weapon that Magath was referring to earlier, because at this stage in the timeline, the only weapon that Marley has that can destroy Titan shifters is shifters of their own. Anyway, with that said, that is the end of part 2 of What If Eren Got the Colossal Titan, and if you liked it then be sure to drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos like this. When I began making part 2, I didn't originally plan to do a time skip, but I realized in the end that it would be more interesting to skip ahead to the battle in Liberio, but as we continue, it will become more obvious what happened in those 2 years. Before I go, don't forget to comment if you want to enter the prize draw for the Beast Titan plus Levi giveaway, and full details are in the description for how the contest works. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.